you want to start with you, Sandra?
Sandra Joy, local ward councillor for Brimley and Uplands.
And I'm Paxton Hood-Williams, chairman of this panel. So, Liz.
Liz Jordan, Scrutiny Officer.
Louise Gibbard, Cabinet Member for Care Services.
Healy Gwilym, Cabinet Member for Community Support Services.
Julie Davies, Head of Child and Family Services.
Kelly Richards, Principal Officer for Early Help and the Single Point of Contact and Strategic Lead for CMET.
Catherine Silman, I am the Team Manager for the Learning and Innovation Team.
Lindsay Margerson, Principal Officer for Safeguarding Performance and Transformation, Child and Family.
Okay, thank you very much. We can move on to the agenda then, and welcome everybody to this meeting. Suspect it's going to be the last Child and Family Services meeting before Christmas. I doubt if we'll squeeze another one in. So, pardon? Okay, but anyway, very welcome to you and to the officers as well, the members and officers. First item on the agenda is apologies for absence. Liz?
We've received apologies from Councillor Wendy Lewis, Councillor Kevin Griffiths, Cabinet Member Alison Anthony, Chair.
Thank you, Liz. And anybody got any disclosures of personal or prejudicial interest that they'd like to make? No, I can't see any hands going up there. Item 3 is the normal prohibition of votes and declaration of party whips. Item 4 then is the minutes of the previous meeting. For members, you've obviously had the minutes and had a chance to look at them before the meeting, and you've seen the letters as well. There's nothing I picked out in particular that I needed to mention. I don't know if anybody else has. If not, would somebody like to propose that they be accepted, please? Thank you, Sandra. Seconder. Somebody second? I'm looking at you, Erica, but for Victoria. Okay, thank you. In that case, we'll move on to item 5, which is public question time. I don't think we've had any questions submitted. So that is nice and simple and straightforward. And that leads us on to the agenda proper then, on item 6 in particular, the update on child and family improvement. Sorry, child and family performance monitoring. So I assume, Julie, you're going to take us through this? And questions as... Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, thanks, Paxton. So I'll give an overview and pull out some headlines, and then I'll invite Kath. She wants to add to maybe some of the headlines, but also she's going to talk through our approach to qualitative auditing. You remember last time we mentioned that when we talked about performance, and she would have a particular focus on children that have been on the register previously, just to give you an update of where we're at with that, and then we'll include some detail on that in the future report. So this is September, which feels like a long time ago, I have to say. And in that month, the level of demand hadn't changed too much. And the proportion remaining in the service and transferring into our child protection teams, which is the supported care planning teams, was higher though. So that although what was coming in wasn't more, what we were passing through for statutory intervention did go up in September. And that was more indicative of the complexity of need that we were seeing presented in the front door, either in terms of the presenting issues from the children or their parents or the circumstances that they were finding themselves in. And I've given some examples in the report this time, and this is parents struggling with their child's behaviour at home or in the community, or not wanting their child to continue living with them because they were struggling with their behaviour. And the service was needing to look at finding creative solutions to try and engage with the parents or carers and to keep the child safe in alternative accommodation. So in September, we were very busy after the summer period of trying to help children to either return home or to live in alternative accommodation without them necessarily needing to become looked after. And there was a lot of work that was undertaken by the team in that regard and continues actually through now, but maybe not at the same level. We're also seeing parents where domestic abuse, mental health and drug use were influencing their parental choices. And children, what this meant was that children were suffering or at risk of suffering significant harm. So we saw a lot of child protection investigations underway, cases going to conference, initial child protection conferences, and some more children perhaps being registered because of that harm that was being suffered at that level. So we were seeing children that were being neglected, either being left alone at home or not being fed or having a poor diet, or being exposed to unsafe adults coming into their home and not having the right level of parental supervision. So more cases were needing to come through from the integrated safeguarding hub, which sits in Kelly's area in the front door, from into our supported care planning teams, which are the teams that cover child protection and court cases, but that was due to the intensity of support required and the level of risk that we were seeing, but also the length of intervention and support that was then needed. So where we might be able to create safety in the front door in Kelly's area and not pass through to the longer term teams, we were seeing that we needed longer term intervention and support. And that's why there were more cases then being passed through to those area teams. They're still, and it's still the same this month as I'm talking now, in a precarious position in those teams in terms of staffing. We haven't had so many leavers, but there was a period of sickness in that month. Not so many leavers of late, I mean, but in that month there were. And we still haven't had any applicants for social worker posts in those teams in the past few months, not even agency applicants. So that means that the wider service has continue to assist with case allocations so that statutory duties can be met and children are able to be kept safe. So that was the disabled children's team, our adolescent team base, and also support from the academy in relation to going to see children or helping to complete assessments. The timeliness of single assessments being completed did dip, but what we can see is that the average time to complete an assessment was 55 days. We still maintain our position where it's the best thing is for a good assessment to be completed rather than it being completed in time, because it's important that we get to understand what matters to the family and understand the circumstances and understand the risks fully, and also what's working well for them, which is where we start with our assessments. Although half the assessments are out of time scale, they're only 2 to 3 days over, so that's a positive indicator, and also we know how far out of time scale they are. Pleased to say that position has improved again in the month that we've just passed in terms of the October report. We'll wait to see what November brings. And this is still dealing with the challenges of recording information on WICIS. So that's why we continue to keep manual tracking. So we've got a backup so we can have assurances and check those if we're not confident that things are being recorded in the right place on our management information system. In September, for the first time in a long while, the numbers of children on the child protection register dipped just below 200. We're still within our predicted range, so it's nothing for us to be unduly worried about. If we weren't too high, we weren't too low. Statutory visits being recorded on WICIS in a timely way. The visits were happening, but we weren't recording them on WICIS in time for Kath, who's here today, to then run the report off from the system. That has an improved position as the months have gone by. Through the manual data, that gives us those assurances to check where we can't get it off the electronic system. The service is very busy with unborns, with a number of potential removals likely over the coming months between now and January, February. And at that time, we had 18 babies who would be registered on the child protection register when they were born, and an increasing number of children in what we call public law outlines. So we're considering through an assessment whether we might need to put the matter before the court to seek an order to perhaps share parental responsibility. Doesn't always mean that we remove children at birth, but it does give that extra safeguards if we want to continue supporting the baby with mom to see if they can remain living together. And we are spending longer in public law outline following the issuing of further guidance from the judiciary in that regard. In September, we removed the capability charts, which were the charts that show us our upper and lower limits that we would expect. They've been reintroduced of late. We're all very happy about that. And that was just due to licenses expiring and us having to renew them. So it wasn't anything that we were worried about, but they are now going back into the report. So those are the headlines, Chair, from myself. Is it okay to hand over to Kath now? And she'll pull out anything else that she'd like to, but also focus on our qualitative auditing.
Hi, thank you. So in terms of our qualitative auditing, we have a couple of avenues to do this. So we've got our, weekly safeguarding review meeting. So the purpose of this space is to have a multi-agency group who consider thematic safeguarding themes. So they would include children who have had a Section 47 inquiry, who may have not proceeded to an initial conference, or we also look at children who have been on the Child Protection Register for over a certain period of time. So 15 months is that period. But we also look at children who have been re-registered within the last 12 months. So they would come through that forum. So that's a weekly forum that sits. And in terms of the learning that we gather from that, so we can consider what themes we're seeing, as Julie's picked out there in the September report, in regards to categories on the Child Protection Register. We look at whether or not the child's voice is being heard through the things that are coming through. So in the assessment writing, do the family understand what the processes are that they are in? Have we established safety? So all of these things are reviewed within this forum and are done so in a multi-agency with health, police, education and social services. So learning from that was annually, but one of the things that we recognised this year is that we need to be more responsive to our learning and sharing that. So we were looking at developing quarterly reports. So we have got quarterly learning, but what we've recognised is actually we would be looking at bringing that into a 6-monthly report so that it can be then filtered and shared throughout the service. And that's something that we're currently looking at. What we would usually do is take that feedback through to principal officers so that they have an understanding of what is happening in the service. But then it's also really important that our social workers and are having a bit of an understanding in terms of how we're keeping our children safe, what's working well, what areas of improvement. And similarly to that forum, we have our peer review. It's the same framework in the sense that it's a multi-agency, and we are holding thematic reviews. So what we've this is a new forum for us. So we've only held 2. So we've held some reviews into the Born Into Care process, and we've also held a review into the CMET work. And what we will be doing next in January is our child protection processes and looking at re-registrations in early next year. And the purpose of this forum is really to look at whether or not our responses to these needs are appropriate. What are we inclusive of the children and young people that we're working with? Are we establishing safety as partner agencies? So similar to the weekly safeguarding, but we're looking at it more in terms of the processes that we have, and then trying to understand the themes that come from that to help us understand how our practice can then be responsive. And we also link in with training and our principal social worker as well, in terms of if there's any training, particular training needs across the service. And in terms of the feedback for that, we also are looking at putting on like I want to say a learning newsletter, but it's very new. But we want to make sure that these learnings are shared across the service and they don't get lost, because I think that's really important, because it's also highlighting lots of good practice. And I think sometimes that can get lost in the sea of things at this time in particular. So that's where we are currently doing our majority of our qualitative work, and then feeding that back through the service and making sure that it's feeding into our practice and our responses.
Sorry, Louise?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Julie and Kath for the report. And I think what particularly what Kath says is so important, because obviously the wellbeing report just gives us a snapshot of that data for the month, and I think it's really important to know that we are learning those lessons and looking at the bigger picture around it. And in the last month, I think since the last meeting anyway, I was and Hayley as well, we were privileged to go to 2 of the whole service staff days in child and family services, and that's another example of where teams are coming up to the front and they're presenting examples of good practice to the rest of the staff. And it's so impactful and emotional professional, in fact, watching what the teams are doing. So it gives you such a much wider flavour than this report could possibly give. So, and you know, as always, my thanks to the teams for their ongoing hard work.
Okay, so that, thanks for that. Basically, what you're looking at is the processes as such, isn't it? Just to make sure that you are working to the best, I was going to say best way possible, I suppose, and or using the best techniques as well, and also the importance of training. And presumably you bring in the academy into that at some stage.
Yeah, absolutely. So the academy are part of it in terms of they're one of the members that sit on it. In terms of what we'd like to do, especially in terms of the peer review, is to then look at how we can utilise that forum to expand into other themes across the service. But in terms of the work that we look at, it's across board. So it would be cases from the academy, cases from supported care planning, from our looked after children's teams base. So yeah, it is across the board.
But thank you for that at this stage, Catherine. I'm going to throw it open to members now to ask if they got any questions. I'm looking to see if I got any hands up at the moment, and we don't seem to have. So obviously you've answered all the questions, which makes it almost, I guess, a perfect presentation when you get to that stage, isn't it? So congratulations on that. I did have a few questions, but I won't go into them today because, as you say, this report is a little bit out of date. And we'll wait and have a good look at the next one, and hopefully that will be better in terms of timing. So if nobody wants to add anything to that, I will say thank you very much. The figures, from what I saw, by and large, I got very few in the way of queries there, I must admit myself, so it looks reasonably settled. The one thing I will say, I think, is that you're obviously producing the new WIC system to produce your data. I'm beginning to understand that the Welsh Government has now decided to move away from it. Do you know which way that's going to go and what the timetable is for it?
No, not currently. We're still in the engagement phase with Welsh Government to know what that looks like. So no, still very much unknown.
I must admit I'm having difficulty understanding the logic, because a lot of time and effort has already gone in to it, and now they need to change it. And certainly when I was working, I had a lot to do with putting in computer systems basically as a user rather than a program of that nature. But I know the amount of work that has to be done behind the scenes in terms of transferring data, etc. So I'm not sure why they've decided to go that way. I don't know if you've had any answers on that, Louise.
No, sorry, not really. I'm just that that it's in the pipeline, and no updates, I'm afraid.
Presumably there must be benefits in doing it, less hopefully they wouldn't be doing it for any other reason. But if somebody can find out what those benefits are going to be, I think it'd be useful for us to know. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. So you've all got the full report for improvement and transformation. I've captured some kind of key updates just to share with you all now. So as an overview, we've got neurodiversity lead worker has now been appointed as part of prevention and early intervention. Offering support across child and family with case discussions, reflections and upskilling staff to support parents to understand neurodiversity. We've also got the Parent Advocacy Network, so they've continued to be successful. The lead worker from Swansea, unfortunately, has had to move back into the service, but we are reassuring parents in terms of our alternative plans and ideas for Swansea to continue to support that project going forward and as they move into PPAS. We've got single point of entry has been in place for over a year now. enabling targeted support at the right time based on what matters to children and their families. An update on the therapy teams. So we've had 3 therapeutic support workers who have been appointed and they're now in post. This has been enabling the team to offer group work for carers using a psychoeducation response. So it's kind of an intervention with a systemic approach, integrating emotions and motivations for them to understand the young person better. And the team have recently just finished their pilot of 6 weeks. Feedback has included that carers felt they were able to support each other, to acknowledge and appreciate each other. And they felt that they were doing really well, listening to each other and recognising how well each other were doing on the course and having that space and forum to share those. And they also recognised at times that they revert to what they say as their older parenting styles, but now they're able to push back as a result of the pilot scheme, and they revisit what they've learned to better support the children who have significant trauma. So they're currently pulling together their next programme ready to start in 2024. So that's really positive. We've got the new birth plan being used within Born Into Care. I know you've all heard that discussed here before, and the PAC team has been created with 4 full-time staff, and they offer practical hands-on support to parents with newborns. So like Julie said, where there's a plan for children to remain with parents, but there's safeguarding concerns, a PAC package might be put with the family so that they can return home with their newborns in a safe way. And then we've got CMET. Kelly will be giving more of an update, but in terms of on the 1st of January 2023, there were 22 young people subject to protocol, whom the local authority has responsibility for. And from January to September 2023, they were placed another 29 young people on protocol. They considered 25 young people and removed 31 from protocol. So there's a few figures of young people in and out of the service. If I move on to placement sufficiency, so we've got our in-house residential provision. So recruitment continues with the appointment of a new registered manager, and 8 adverts for support workers are currently live at this time to continue to pull people into the service. Managers across the teams have been working with the in-house therapy teams to ensure that their workers and the managers embed PACE into practice and taking more of a therapeutic and trauma-informed way with the young people. So looking at upskilling staff to achieve better outcomes for children who do become looked after. New buildings have been identified with the registration of TDA. And work has now continued at Rosili to create 2 additional bedrooms for emergency provisions going forward to increase our provision. And if I move on to workforce, so as Louise referred to earlier, we've had the 3 staff days organised during November for Child and Family Services. Attendance across 3 days was really good. There were great examples of good practice, and it was really emotional, kind of people coming forward with their stories and examples, and also looking at kind of practice and language going forward and how we use that with children and young people we work with. So it was really powerful to be part of that. We're still, as Julie referred to, having issues with recruiting social workers, but we are moving into kind of support workers now, seeing those coming through into post to offer support to the non-statutory areas. And also in relation to the academy. So looking at the development pod within the academy, and the aim of that is to offer additional support to staff with their practice. So if there are any areas of concerns, or if a member of staff is coming forward and saying that they may be struggling, it's having that wraparound support with them as part of the development pod to improve their practice and also increase their confidence and resilience in specific areas to try and kind of target that so they feel a bit more comfortable and we can achieve better outcomes. So they're the 3 areas that we tend to focus on at the moment, and they're the key updates that I have today. Thank you, Chair.
I want to put that on. Perhaps you can hear me there. I said I throw it open to members, and I'm waiting for questions, but obviously it's very quiet. Just to pick up first of all on residential care and where we are with that at the moment, because my understanding is you're still struggling to find appropriate properties which we can purchase and then modify to suit the purposes. Where are we with capacity? Are we having to send young people out of the area to get the accommodation we need?
Yes, in short, we were seeing an increase of numbers of children in residential care. Some of that is linked to not having sufficient foster care placements available. But we have 20 assessments underway at the moment for foster care, so we're hopeful that position will change over the next few months. We have 4 in-house beds available at the moment. We're looking over the next 3 years to increase that to 15, but that does depend on us identifying properties to in the right place and in the right condition. So we're looking at alternative ways to achieve that in terms of working collaboratively with local owners of properties to try and then create different provisions in different types of ways that then might realise that building and home being registered sooner than we thought. So lease arrangements, for example, rather than purchase. So although we have capital funds to purchase, it is proving inordinately difficult to find suitable properties that can be refurbished and then meet the registration requirements of CIW within the time frame that we have available. But we are pursuing a number of options. So I'm hopeful in the next 6 months, certainly when we come back next time, I'll be able to say to you, oh, well, we're actually working on this property and this property now. But in terms of you mentioned the developments at Rosilly. So that's something new that's come on board. So that will offer 2 short-term arrangements to hopefully prevent children needing to come into care, or if they needed to come, it would be for a very short period of time for us to then support them and their family, for them to go back to the family. So that's a new development that's come on stream since we last met, and we are still exploring whether we could make any expansions at any of our existing provisions. But that we need to look at. We're taking some advice from building services on that and planning as to scoping out what that could look like. So we are trying to be as creative as we can in looking at alternative local solutions.
Sorry, I forgot to put it on again, didn't I? Paragraph 4.2, I think, important staff reward and recognition in that report. It's an opportune time of the year, really, to ask you to take back to the staff our thoughts and our gratitude for the work that is done. I'm looking at the members now and I'm saying we see these figures and we see them coming through, and yes, we do get questions from them, don't get me wrong, but the fact that there are so few questions suggests to me that really be really pleased with the performance that is there within the department as a scrutiny performance panel. So perhaps you might like to take that message back to your staff. I think this is an opportune time to do it, as I say, and say we'd be looking forward to having it continuing for the next 12 months and thereafter. But anyway, I'll say thank you very much on that basis.
Can I say on that as well, Dave Howe's sort of shared all the positive comments that there were at full council, back with all the staff in adult and in child and family services. So that's really appreciated.
Paragraph 4.4 is important there and always is important as far as I'm concerned these days, and you know the reason why in that respect, in terms of recruitment and agency staffing and where we are in that respect.
So recruitment of social workers continues to be a challenge. So we mainly receiving applicants that aren't suitable because they're not qualified. or they're from overseas, and then that would take a long time for them to take up the position in Swansea. So we have continued to expand our alternatively qualified workforce, which is really good news for us in terms of people then being able to be on the pathway to become qualified, because we've increased the numbers available to become OU students and get the qualification through that route. But we currently have, I think, 5 agency social workers across the service, which compared to other local authorities is not a bad position to be in. That's not to say that if we couldn't find the right agency social workers that we wouldn't welcome them into the service. The last 2 were within our looked after children team, and then we've got a couple, 2 or 3 in other parts of the service. But that we're just not getting any interest from agency or for permanent social workers, and that's similar across the local authorities in Wales. Yeah, of course.
An area where we have been quite successful in recruitment is into our social work academy for newly qualified social workers. So the model that we've got in Swansea of that really nurturing and supportive environment has really encouraged staff who had just qualified from the university, but also staff who had taken up newly qualified positions in other local authorities and then quite quickly transferred over to Swansea. So although we have struggled to recruit experienced social workers into our supported care planning teams, we do actually have 11 now newly qualified social workers into the academy, with a view then to supporting them in their first year of practice, making sure they are equipped, you know, to deal with the pressures in the supported care planning teams. And then within the next 12 months, we will be transitioning them over into those teams. So although, you know, we have struggled to get experienced staff, we have been quite successful with newly qualified social workers.
I think we've already said that we're been impressed with the academy setup and the thinking behind it, and whoever came up with that idea obviously is much it is proven to be really useful, I think, and I assume other councils will go the same way eventually. I don't know, but I don't know what the situation is with other councils. Are they, relatively speaking, got more agency staff around than Swansea has?
I think yes, significantly more. Some a few more than us, but if you look at Bridgend and Cardiff, some of the local authorities in the north, in North Wales, they have, because they have the challenge of on the border with English local authorities, and so yes, it does vary across Wales, but we are probably one of the lowest with agency social workers at the moment. But I think, as Kelly's quite rightly said, the academy is one of our particular strengths at the moment. That means we are attracting newly qualified, which I think is why we don't have such a high number of agency social workers.
Yes. At that point in time, I think I'll say thank you for the report, Lindsay, and perhaps we can move on to item 8, which is the contextual missing, exploited and trafficked children report. I don't know who's presenting. Lindsay again?
That's me, no?
Pardon?
Kelly.
Sorry, Kelly.
Yeah, Kelly.
My mistake.
So you've had the report. It's quite lengthy, sorry about that, but there was a lot to say. So we've been on quite a journey in Swansea with contextual safeguarding, which is a relatively new concept. So as you said, CMET stands for contextual, missing, exploited and trafficked. So we started work with Dr. Carleen Furman in Bedfordshire University back in 2019. And that was to look at the current systems we have in place and how they respond to extra familial harm, so harm that occurs outside the family home, because our legislation and our processes for dealing with individual children who are at risk of harm, are very well embedded and understood. But it was how we coped with the harm that it was experienced outside the home, and particularly in relation to adolescents, that we were looking at, and our system's capability of response. So in those early days, we had one worker, a practice lead, who sat in our service quality unit, and the focus of that worker was to work with individual children who had met the threshold for a child protection conference because of issues of extrafamilial harm, and develop safety plans with those children that considered the context in which they were experiencing that harm, and not always put in the onus on their parent or carer to keep them safe, because when the harm happens outside the family home, then there's little that the parent carer can do, particularly around that those teenage years, when actually children are more interested in what's going on outside their home and what their friends and their peers think than they do about what their parents think. From that work, identifying and building those robust safety plans, we felt that we could bring that much earlier on into the process for children and move it into the poverty and prevention, into the prevention arena, in order to stop it getting to the point where it met the threshold for significant harm. That wasn't going to be able to be achieved in SQU, so we took the decision to move that post into the single point of contact at the front end of the service. Initially, as part of that work with Bedfordshire, the plan was to pilot the approach in a specific area of Swansea, and we worked for some time to identify that area using data on where we were having the most referrals that related to extrafamilial harm. However, when we moved the post into the front door, we changed the focus of that pilot, and rather than focus on one particular area, we decided that we would actually embed this work across the continuum of need and create some indicators of extrafamilial harm, which we did in partnership with Bedfordshire and the Contextual Safeguarding Network, so that we could apply this approach across Swansea. Now, obviously, one worker wasn't going to be able to do that all by herself. So in 2020, we did a systems review of referrals that came in for extrafamilial harm. And we spoke to the parents and the carers and the children and young people who had experienced extrafamilial harm, and asked from their point of view what support they would find helpful and what would help them to keep themselves safe in the communities and the spaces and places they were spending time. We also looked at, the data in relation to where referrals were coming from, what types of referrals were they, because extrafamilial harm covers a whole host of things, doesn't it? So it can be child criminal exploitation, child sexual exploitation, children who are trafficked, children who have frequent missing episodes and what happens to them when they're missing. And then also that contextual element around the spaces and the places that they go into where the harm occurs. So from that, we developed a small team to work with the principal social worker, and we employed initially one senior social worker and 5 youth work coordinators. So that became the CMET team, and that was the core team. We quickly expanded to 2 senior social workers because once you open those gates, the demand just gets bigger. So the contextual and missing and trafficked team is made up of currently 1 principal social worker, 2 senior social workers, and the 5 youth hub coordinators. They are funded through a mixture of the Children and Communities Grant and the Violence Prevention Unit in the PCC. We've also recently brought on board a data analyst. Now, that post also is funded by the VPU, and her role is to triangulate, if you like, data from all of the Violence Prevention Unit posts funded across our region. So that's able to help us see the impact of the work that this team is doing. So the CMET team do 2 levels of work. So the social workers do the statutory element of the work. So where referrals are received for extrafamilial harm, they will have initial strategy meetings, and they will also chair meetings for other teams where it's not a new referral because the individual is still open, but there are presenting issues of extrafamilial harm. A big piece of the social workers' work is chairing protocol meetings where children are placed on protocol if they have been identified as being at risk of exploitation, either criminal or sexual, or whether indeed they're having frequent missing episodes. So Lindsay mentioned earlier some of the figures of young people who who live in Swansea and are from Swansea. That team also chairs a lot of strategy meetings for young people who are living in Swansea but are placed here by other local authorities, because we have got quite a number of independent care homes. And those figures are not reflected in our own children, but they are separately, and they're in that CMET activity report. So we can see in the activity report that by taking a contextual approach, that we've had quite an impact on reports of missing young people, repeated missing young people. And we've done that in two ways. One is that we developed a training package for the independent care homes on developing realistic safety plans that the young people were part of and, you know, were buying into and were therefore more likely to stick to. But also undertaking return home interviews. So whenever there was a missing episode, one of the youth workers would go out and have a return home interview with the young people to try and understand where they were going, what they were doing, and what the draw was. And you will be able to see from, you know, some of the figures in that activity report that we reduced the number of repeat missing episodes. And so it did have a really positive impact. So that's the tier 1 work, which is the statutory element, if you like. And then the tier 2 work is the work that our youth workers do primarily. And that is the work around responding to referrals where there are issues being identified in the spaces and the places that young people spend time, but also in relation to peer groups of young people. So, you know, historically, if there was a referral in relation to a group of young people that we were concerned about, we would open those young people individually, and they would all have a different worker probably, and we'd try and do that work with them on a one-to-one basis. Well, actually, what they were telling us is they want to do this work with their friends. So what the youth workers do is they go into the communities, into the spaces and places that the young people spend time, and they get to know them, and then they work with them as a whole group to try and create safety. So obviously, we're not going to be able to do that with the young people on their own, because they're in our communities, aren't they? So we also have to work with the communities. So part of the youth workers' role is to work with community members, with business owners in that community, you know, with different departments of the council, such as parks, and to try and make the places that young people spend time safer for them, so that they are not at risk of exploitation. So in the activity report, you will see that some of those contextual cases are open for quite a long time, and I think the average is between 160 and 180 days. And the reason for that is young people, you know, they don't work with you, you know, easily. You have to build that relationship. You have to develop some trust. You have to get to know them. So that's why that process takes longer than you would expect for, you know, for an individual case where you're dealing with one young person at a time. So that's the area work that the youth workers do. Then we have our CMET panel. So the CMET panel is a multi-agency panel. It sits on a fortnightly basis. We are regularly having in excess of 26 people at the CMET panel. It's been running for nearly 3 years now, and to be fair, the attendance hasn't dropped off at all. So we're really pleased with that. So it's a panel where people can refer in contextual cases. They can refer in a park or school, or, you know, a McDonald's restaurant where they might be having some issues with young people. And then in that panel, we will have a discussion, and we will decide who of the panel members is best placed to be the lead agency in supporting this issue. Very often it's us, but very often it's not us. For example, housing might take the lead, and we will work alongside them. So the CMET Youth Panel is strengths-based. Obviously, when the referrals come in, they are in relation to worries that we have, but we're always looking for the positives that are in those areas, and then we try to capitalise and build on those. So strengths-based and solution-focused, and a real shared ownership of the plan that we're going to develop as that partnership. So on the activity report again, you can see that 29 out of the 34 cases that were allocated tier 1 to the youth workers came in through the CMET panel. So that panel is becoming very widely known to referrers now. So, you know, if they have got a concern around a space or a place or a particular group of young people, they know that, you know, the best route for support is in through the CMET panel. So we're consistently receiving, you know, quite appropriate referrals. So some of the cases supported through that CMET panel, and this is just, you know, this is a small example, but probably some of the higher profile cases. So we, well, our first big case, in fact, was where we supported an issue down at Swansea beachfront. There was a newspaper article in Wales Online which described it as a mass brawl involving young people. So the CMET team went down to the beachfront, they talked to the young people, they found out what mattered. And the plan in that instance was really quite simple. So the young people were hanging around on the seafront, right in front of the marina where it was, you know, quite densely populated, and there were a lot of residents. Well, that, you know, that was causing some aggravation for the residents. And once the young people understood that, they were more than happy to move, you know, half a mile down the beach and start hanging around outside the Secret. We had the owners of the Secret on board with that. You know, they were happy to be a safe place for young people to call into if they felt at risk. And I think the reports of antisocial behaviour in that area plummeted as a result of simply understanding what was important to the young people and the residents and the businesses, and then moving them a little bit down the beach where they carried on with what they were doing, you know, being noisy as young people are, but not causing aggravation to people around them. So we also were quite heavily involved with young people in the aftermath of the incident in Mayhill. You know, we did a lot of consultation. As a result of that, we opened a pop-up youth club in Mayhill because what the young people were saying is there was nothing for them to do. So when something exciting was going on Warmwell Hill, they just became involved with it. So we opened that youth club as a, you know, a temporary measure initially, but it's still open. So it has, you know, become quite a permanent fixture. We also worked quite intensively with both the victim, the witnesses and the perpetrator of the serious incident of knife crime that occurred in Ingosainen. And we worked with both peer groups of young people to help them understand that, you know, there are other ways to resolve differences, and we do not need to escalate to that. And again, that case was open for about 18 months, but had really good outcomes for the young people that were involved in that. We also did a piece of work around the river where there was a tragic drowning of a young person. You know, we identified that was a hotspot in warm weather for young people to congregate, and we worked with the water safety team and did a considerable bit of work around making that area of the river safer, and also with the young people from the surrounding areas who were attending there. And we're hoping that during summer months, we can reiterate that work in other areas of Swansea, because what we find with young people is if they move from one place, they'll turn up in another place. So something we need to do. We also were involved, not so heavily, but on the periphery of the large-scale disturbance at Morriston Cemetery. We coordinated an extraordinary CMET in relation to that, but we're not responsible for the majority of actions because most of the people involved weren't from Swansea, but we did pull in all the other local authorities for them to understand the risks and what had happened up there. And then the last one, it says about the reducing the repeat number of missing episodes by that work that I mentioned earlier of the social workers. So last but not least for the CMET is our youth panel. Some of you will have met our youth panel because they're very proactive. It's made up of young people who the CMET team have worked with following referrals for extra-familial harm. They meet on a fortnightly basis. I think it's actually might be down to monthly now. I think they meet on a monthly basis. They had a meeting last night down in the LC, and they agree the priorities for the work that they think needs to be done in Swansea, which is really good. They're really vocal on what they think needs to change. And some of the big pieces of work they have been involved in, and the biggest, I would say, is the development of a language guide. So what young people, not just our CMET Youth Panel, but young people in general are saying is that sometimes they feel the language used to describe them and what they do when they're out in the community can be quite negative, and that they would like to see people, professionals, community members, change the way that they view them and talk about them. So the CMET Youth Panel have developed a language guide where they have given some suggestions about alternative language that we might use when we are talking about them and their circumstances. They have presented that language guide to some of our elected members. Last week they went to the Crossfades head teachers meeting and they presented there. They met the Children's Commissioner for Wales here in the Guildhall, who was really impressed and is really keen to try and roll that piece of work out across Wales. And she also said that she's always looking for children and young people to consult with and to work in partnership with. And she felt that our CMET Youth Panel were, really engaging, and she would want to do that in the future. So some of our youth panels, some of them were older, some of them were not, worked with Cardiff University, the Children's Social Care Research and Development Centre, and created some videos in relation to criminal exploitation of children. Now, we can send you the links for those videos. They are being shared with education providers across Wales. You can tell they are children from Swansea, and we have got our logo on the end. But it's not a video that is going to go out on YouTube for anyone to look at. You have to be sent a link and a code and then you can watch it, but it is going to be disseminated to education providers. And that's one of the videos that is highly likely to make you cry because it is so emotive. So there's a video from a girl's perspective, and then there's a video from a boy's perspective, and that is around the far-reaching impact that criminal exploitation can have, not just on the young person who is being exploited, but on their family, their friends, and very often their wider community. So that was an excellent piece of work. And then another piece of work that they regularly engage in is working alongside our trading standards with the test purchasing of things like vapes and alcohol and knives. And again, that's been quite successful. They've had a number of establishments closed down because they've been sold prohibited items. And then lastly, some older CMET Youth Panel members worked alongside South Wales Police, where they went round to hotels and they sent young people in with adults who were clearly not related to them, tried to book a hotel room, maybe for a couple of hours or for a night, to see what the responses from staff in those hotels were. And then from the back of that, we were able to develop a training package for hotels, which helps them to understand the signs of exploitation so that they will be better to respond to it in the future. So this year, building on all that good work that we've been doing over the last 3 years, we have been one of only 2 local authorities in Wales who have been successful in securing some funding from the Youth Endowment Fund for their Safer Homes project. So the Safer Homes project is about a team around the child. So it's about all agencies working together to understand extrafamilial harm and trying to make a real difference to the young people that experience it. So we are doing that across the whole of Swansea, but obviously with limited resource. So we're going to pilot 2 areas in Swansea where we're going to use this funding to employ staff from a range of different backgrounds. So there's going to be people from youth offending, people from substance misuse services, people from Media Academy who deal with knife crime and serious youth violence. And then we're going to come together into these community teams, which will be linked really closely with the schools and work with the young people in those areas, both on a targeted basis, but also on an awareness raising basis to try and, prevent them getting into situations where they might be exploited. The aim of the funding is to break down some of those structural barriers around extrafamilial harm and what we can do about it. The initial funding for the implementation and pilot phase is £500,000 for 18 months. And if we are successful in, demonstrating that we've made a real difference and good outcomes for those two areas, then there is potential for this to double over the next 2 to 3 years. To £2 or £3 million. So that will be, a huge advantage for Swansea, and we're really, really excited about that. So the pilot areas in Swansea that we have chosen, because we had to choose two as part of the Youth Endowment Fund, are the Penderi and East areas. So included in the CMET activity report are some heat maps. So these are showing the areas where we have the most of our referrals for extrafamilial harm. So what we did was went with the areas where we had most referrals from, and the East area covers the city centre. So although not all the children referred will be from the East area, we do have a high number of referrals because obviously they converge on the city centre. But what that means is we will be able to do some targeted work in that city centre around extrafamilial harm. So, in conclusion, traditional child protection processes would have considered these children on an individual basis, and it's highly likely that we would never have had this overarching understanding of how to create more safety in the spaces and places that children spend time, because we would be going to their parents and asking them, what are you going to do to prevent this happening? Well, and in the adolescent stage, we have quickly learned that that's just not going to work. So this new approach is helping us to understand what matters to young people in the contexts in which they experience extrafamilial harm, and then working so that we can build structural change so that in the future, more young people will not be in that position, because we'll be creating guardianship and safety in those places so that the community and businesses and people who are around there will have an understanding of contextual safeguarding and risk to children, and will respond to them in a different way than they have historically. And that's that.
Okay. Thank you very much. I have to say, before Louise comes back in, comprehensive. You obviously live and breathe the subject, and total commitment. And thank you for that. And I'll let Louise say
That's basically what I was going to say, because thank Kelly, because who's such a fantastic advocate for this work, and which is so innovative and so impressive, and it's amazing to see it getting the rightful recognition it deserves from the Home Office. And I think, Hayley, you were going to mention the award. It sadly didn't win, but one of our other teams won the award instead. One of our local area coordination won the award, but Hayley was at the ceremony. You could tell us a bit more.
Yeah, again, just to thank Kelly, and I think it's really clear to see the understanding that our child and family services have about our young people, that population. And yeah, I was at the awards, and the team were highly commended for the work that they do, and there was some young people representing who were really excited about the being present and having that recognition for the work that they're also doing, which really forms part of Safer Communities, which was the award ceremony. But that's exactly what they're doing, is trying to keep our young people safe, but also the wider community as well. And yeah, it's just I'm really impressed. I'm always blown away by the work that's undertaken by our child and family services.
Yeah. Any members want to come in with any questions? Erica?
Thank you very much, Chair, and my apologies for the very awkward start of my meeting with you. I just want to say, Kelly, what you've said and what you're doing is absolutely amazing. I remember the days when, yes, we'd go to the parents and that would be it. That you're reaching out to the businesses and the communities and doing everything you can to keep our kids safe is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And I know you're under-resourced, and I know you're all so committed. It's just, I'm just echoing what everybody else has said. A big thank you for that work. I know you're going to continue with it because I've known you a bit and a while, and you've always been the same, out there and looking for new ways to do things. And we can't ask for more. We know we're missing people. We know there's gaps. We know there's pits everywhere. But to see where we're going now, we're really, you're taking the lead in trying our best to keep our kids safe. And I think I probably speak for everybody to say, you know, if you need us in the communities, please call on us as well, because we'd be happy to help. And just a big thank you to the team for all that you do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Erica. I think you probably were just reinforcing what I said initially, so thank you for that. Just a couple of questions, if I may, just out of interest. You talk about a pop-up youth club in Mayhill. How often does that pop up? Is it daily or once a week?
Once a week.
What happens the other 6 nights? Because that's always my concern with youth clubs, is for what does happen. Because there's someone to go one night, but what happens the rest?
Well, in Swansea, we have only got 5 youth clubs. So there are 5 youth clubs. There's one in each locality. There's one in Townhill, which is not far from Mayhill. So the children of Mayhill and Townhill do have the opportunity for 2 nights of youth club, because they can go to the one or the other. There's one in Bryn Hyfryd, which is relatively new, and then the other 3 existing ones. There's one in Stadwyn in Llansamlet, one in Gorsainon, and there's one in Blaen y Maes. So those youth clubs are run by our Evolve Youth Service, and the Evolve Youth Service, it's not a massive service, and they do try and cover as much of the city as possible. So historically, the youth service only ran youth club in the 4 areas, because Bryn Hyfryd is a new youth club. But over the last 2 years, we have brought that 5th youth club on, and then the 6th youth club in Mayhill. And we have increased the hours of the staff that work in them, but we also now it's a blended approach to youth work now. So we run those 5 youth clubs 1 night a week for each youth club, but on different nights. So there is a youth club in Swansea running Monday to Friday. They're just in different areas. And then on the other nights, the youth workers go out and about to the spaces and places that children and young people spend time. So if the youth club is not open, the youth workers will be in the community, engaging young people where they are, rather than expecting them to come to club.
Yeah, I was just going to say, because obviously, you know, it's a model that we find is working, because not all young people want to go to a youth club. They would rather be hanging around in and have that freedom. So it's it's definitely the right thing to do.
Yeah, there was a Red Cafe, was it down in Mumbles at one time?
Yeah, there are a few independent youth clubs not run by the council. There's quite a number of those, but we are not involved in them all. And then there are East run a youth club for children from ethnic minorities, and Mixed Up run a youth club for children with disabilities, and and then there's one down in Sketty, I think, or there was. So there are a few that are not run by the council, but what we do promote those through our social media channels, so young people know where things are happening, even if we are not running them. And the YMCA have got a number of youth clubs that run in the city centre.
So yeah, I haven't got any other questions. If other members have, then now's your opportunity. Once again, I'll just say thank you very much, Kelly. It's fascinating. And I'll move on to item 9 on the agenda then, I think, which is the work programme. Only keep you 2 seconds, so it's not worth disappearing until we finish. I think members will have seen the work programme, and next month we will be talking about CAMS basically, and the corporate parenting board update, so that'll be interesting. And then in February we'll have our budget meetings, and we'll see what comes out of that as well. On that basis, can I take this opportunity to wish everybody here the compliments of the season. Very Merry Christmas. Happy one. And a happy and prosperous New Year as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paxton. Bye all.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone. Bye.